The Billionaire's Disguise. Chapter 1. The Empty Mansion. I thought she loved me until I heard her laugh at me behind my back. Those words haunted Darius Cole as he sat alone at the far end of his dining table. A table so long it could have seated a dozen people, yet it held only him. The chandelier above cast a cold light over untouched plates of eggs, bacon, and waffles. But the food might as well have been plastic. He had no appetite. His phone lay broken on the floor, the glass spider-webbed from the force with which he had thrown it. A few minutes earlier, he had watched his fiancée Monique laughing with her girlfriends, replaying the same clip again and again. In it, she mocked the way he stuttered whenever he was nervous. They all laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. One of them even clutched her stomach and said she would never marry a man who couldn't finish a sentence. Monique's words were sharper than any blade. If it wasn't for his billions, do you think I'd be waiting on a stammering Romeo? Darius sat still, his broad shoulders slumped as though the weight of those words had bent him in half. He was 33 years old, tall, polished, always dressed in tailored suits that made him look untouchable. But that morning he felt stripped bare. The mansion that once symbolized his power now felt like a cage of polished stone. He could hear the quiet hum of the air conditioner, the faint footsteps of servants waiting to clear the table, but inside his chest it was only silence. A silence that pressed down harder than any noise ever could. He pushed the plate away and walked to the window. Outside stretched manicured lawns and the black outline of his Cadillac Escalade parked in the driveway. He saw the world he had built, a fortress of money, glass, and steel, but it no longer meant anything. What was the point of owning half the city if he couldn't own one honest smile? His driver, Jamal, stepped carefully into the room. "Sir, the plane is fueled. The board is waiting in Houston. Should I have the car ready?" Darius didn't turn. His voice was low but steady. "Cancel it." Jamal hesitated. "Cancel, sir. The board meeting." "I said cancel it." His words echoed against the marble floor. He took a deep breath and finally looked at Jamal. "Get me clothes. Cheap ones. Something nobody would notice. Sneakers, old jeans, whatever you can find. I want a disguise." Jamal's eyes widened. "Sir, you can buy privacy with money. You can fly anywhere in the world. Why would you—" "Because I want to breathe," Darius interrupted, his voice breaking for the first time. "I want to see who I am when the money is stripped away. I want to know if anyone can love me for more than this empire." The driver stood frozen, unsure if his boss had lost his mind. But the look in Darius's eyes told him this wasn't madness, it was desperation. The kind of desperation that makes a man do something reckless just to feel alive again. That night, Darius stripped off his custom suit and pulled on faded jeans and a t-shirt that smelled faintly of dust from the thrift store. He looked into the mirror and almost didn't recognize himself. Gone was the polished billionaire, the man groomed for boardrooms and red carpets. In his place stood a man who could be mistaken for a vendor on any city corner. His beard was trimmed rough. His sneakers were worn. For the first time in years, he smiled, not because of who the world thought he was, but because of who he might finally get to be. The next morning, he carried a small cooler filled with ice cream cups and drove not toward the airport, but to the streets of Jackson, Mississippi. the south side where cracked sidewalks carried the weight of tired feet. The air was heavy with the smell of frying chicken, hot asphalt, and sweat. It was a different world than the one his wealth had fenced him off from. A world alive with noise, laughter, struggle, and survival. He found an empty spot at the corner of Bailey Avenue, set the cooler on a milk crate, and sat on a plastic stool. His heart raced as people passed him without a glance. A group of kids ran by dribbling a basketball, their laughter sharp in the morning air. Vendors shouted over each other, calling out prices for ribs, cornbread, and collard greens. A woman pushed a stroller with one hand and carried a bag of laundry with the other. Nobody cared who he was, and that was exactly what he wanted. The first boy who came to his cooler was no older than 10. "You got vanilla?" the boy asked, his lips dry, his eyes too old for his face. "Yes," Darius said with a small smile, scooping carefully and handing him a cup. The boy snatched it and ran off without paying. Darius sat frozen, unsure what to do. Then a voice cut through the noise. "That one never pays. Been hustling these streets since he could walk." Darius turned and saw her. Keisha Johnson. She stood with one hand on her hip, the other balancing a tray of cornbread wrapped in foil. Her face glistened with sweat, but her eyes held a fierce fire that no heat could melt. Her voice was sharp, not cruel but certain, like she had seen men like him before and didn't trust them. "You new here?" she asked, her gaze moving over him slowly as though searching for the lie behind his face. "Yes," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Clearly, you look lost. You don't know the kids who steal. You don't know how to hold your money. You don't belong here." Darius quickly stuffed the few bills he had left into his pocket, embarrassed. "Thank you," he murmured. "Don't thank me yet," she said, turning away. "This street will eat you alive if you don't learn fast." He watched her walk off, her tray balanced perfectly, her shoulders straight. There was something about her that cut through the noise of the market, something raw, something real. He whispered her name to himself, Keisha. That night, back in the small motel room with flickering lights and thin sheets, Darius lay awake staring at the ceiling. The silence was different here, less polished, more honest. For the first time in years, he felt something other than emptiness. He felt the pulse of possibility. He didn't know if Keisha would remember him tomorrow, or if she would even care. But he knew this much. The corner of Bailey Avenue had given him more life in a single day than all the marble halls of his mansion ever had. And he wasn't ready to let that feeling go. Chapter 2. A Disguise for Freedom. The next morning came heavy with heat, though the sun had barely broken over the rooftops of Jackson. Darius Cole woke up on a sagging motel mattress, the kind that left his back aching, and for once he welcomed the pain. It was proof he was no longer sleeping behind locked gates and imported curtains. The motel smelled faintly of cigarettes and damp carpet, a scent that clung to the walls and reminded him of places he had never allowed himself to go before. He splashed water from the cracked sink onto his face, staring at his reflection in the small, foggy mirror. The man looking back wasn't the billionaire who signed contracts worth millions. This man had tired eyes, a beard that wasn't perfectly lined, and a t-shirt so plain it could belong to anybody. That anonymity gave him something his money never could, a strange kind of freedom. He packed the small cooler, his new lifeline, and walked out into the morning. Bailey Avenue was already alive. The sounds of voices floated through the humid air, men unloading crates from trucks, women calling out their prices with practiced rhythm, children darting between stalls like restless birds. The heat pressed down, carrying with it the smells of fried catfish, collard greens, and gasoline from cars idling too long at the stoplight. Darius set his cooler at the same corner as yesterday and sat on the plastic stool. He felt exposed, yet hidden at the same time, like a man sitting inside his own disguise. People passed by him with quick glances, some with suspicion, some with indifference. A group of teenagers snickered at the sight of a grown man in cheap sneakers selling ice cream from a cooler. One of them muttered, "He ain't lasting a week out here." Darius forced himself not to react because he knew they weren't wrong. He was an outsider in a world where survival came from toughness and wit, not from the size of your bank account. By mid-morning, sweat darkened his shirt and his hands ached from scooping. He thought about the boardroom he had abandoned, the polished glass table waiting for him, the voices of men in suits arguing over stock prices. He thought about Monique's laughter echoing inside his head, a laughter that turned every memory bitter. He shook the thought away and looked around. He wasn't here to be reminded of her cruelty. He was here to start over, even if it was just with a cooler and a few dollars in change. Then he saw her again. Keisha Johnson. She moved through the market like she belonged to it, like the noise bent itself around her. Her apron was tied tight, her tray balanced firm on her hip. She had a face that carried both fire and fatigue, the kind of strength born only from long battles life kept throwing. Darius felt something stir inside him at the sight of her. It wasn't attraction in the shallow way he had known before with women drawn to his wealth. This was different. This was recognition. He couldn't name it yet, but he felt it. Keisha's eyes found him as she passed. She stopped, tilted her head, and studied him again. "You still here?" she asked, her voice steady, almost mocking. Darius nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yes." She gave a short laugh that wasn't really laughter. "You must like pain. Nobody stays on that corner long." He wanted to say something, anything that would make her see he wasn't like the others, but the words stuck. All he managed was, "I guess I'm stubborn." She looked at him longer this time, her eyes sharp as if trying to peel back whatever mask he was hiding under. Then she walked off without another word, leaving him to wonder what she had seen in him that made her pause. The day dragged on. Business was slow. A few kids came for ice cream, some paid, some ran. Darius let it go, though each loss chipped away at what little pride he was building. The market was a hard place, but it was honest. Every sale, every shout, every laugh or insult, none of it was coated in the fake sweetness of boardroom lies. When the sun began to fall, painting the sky with streaks of gold and purple, Darius packed his cooler. His arms ached, his back felt stiff, and yet he found himself smiling. For the first time in years, the smile was real. He had earned it not with money, but with sweat. As he walked toward the bus stop, he caught sight of Keisha again, sitting on a crate, her head bent as she kneaded dough. The way her hands moved, rough, quick, steady, told the story of her life. Hands that had fought to survive, hands that had carried burdens heavier than trays of bread. Darius slowed his steps, watching quietly. He wanted to speak, to ask her about her day, to tell her why he was there. but the words died in his throat. What could he say? That he was a man who lived in a mansion bigger than most schools but now sat on a plastic stool selling ice cream to children who didn't pay? She wouldn't believe him, and worse, she might laugh like Monique did. He couldn't bear that sound again. Back in his motel room that night, the ceiling fan rattled and the air smelled of mildew. Darius lay awake, listening to the sounds of the city outside. Distant sirens, cars rolling by, someone arguing 2 doors down. It wasn't comfort, but it was real. He closed his eyes and saw Keisha's face, the way her eyes had locked on his, unafraid, unflinching. There was no pity there, only suspicion, and maybe hidden beneath it a flicker of curiosity. He turned on his side and whispered to himself, "I'll go back tomorrow." But in the silence that followed, another thought came to him, colder and sharper. If Keisha looked too close, if she figured out who he was, everything he had built on that corner would collapse. She might see him as just another rich man playing games with the poor. And maybe in her eyes that was exactly what he was. The thought unsettled him. But beneath the fear he felt something else, something stronger. For the first time in years, Darius wanted to prove himself, not as a billionaire, not as a man with cars and power, but as a man stripped down to nothing. And in that nothing, maybe he could finally discover who he truly was, and if love could exist without the weight of his fortune hanging over it. The night pressed on, and Darius lay there with his eyes open, waiting for morning. Chapter 3. The Woman at the Corner. The third day on Bailey Avenue began with a restless sky. Clouds dragged themselves across the Mississippi heat, heavy and gray, threatening rain that never seemed to come. The air was thick, pressing down on every shoulder, slowing every step. Darius Cole set his cooler on the same spot as before, brushing the sweat from his forehead. His hands trembled slightly, not just from the weight of the ice, but from the thoughts spinning in his head. He had lived 33 years surrounded by servants, assistants, and advisors, yet here he was alone, watching the market open like a stage where everyone already knew their roles except him. The street was alive with voices. Vendors shouted out deals. The sound of gospel music leaked from a nearby radio, and children laughed in the distance. The scent of frying fish mixed with motor oil, creating an odd perfume that clung to the neighborhood. For the first hour, nobody paid him much attention. A few people glanced his way, but their eyes slid past quickly, as though they had already judged him unworthy of their coins. He felt invisible, which was what he wanted, but at the same time the loneliness cut deep. When the first child came running asking for chocolate, he scooped carefully and handed over a cup. The boy dropped a few crumpled bills in his palm and skipped away. That small exchange filled him with a pride he couldn't explain. It was nothing compared to signing $1 million deal, yet it meant more because it was real. Then he saw her again. Keisha Johnson. She came down the street carrying her tray, hips steady, shoulders back, her eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk. Her apron was tied firm at the waist, her scarf pulled tight over her hair. She moved as if the street belonged to her. And maybe it did. People called out her name, asked for her cornbread before she even reached her corner. Children ran to her, tugging at her apron, laughing, calling her Auntie Keisha. She had no wealth, no mansion, but she had respect. She had something he had never been able to buy. Darius felt his throat tighten. There was no reason for him to care about her, no reason for his chest to pound the way it did when her eyes met his, but he couldn't look away. She paused by his stall, studied him with that same sharp expression, and said, "You again. I see you didn't run off." He forced a smile. "I guess I like the corner." She gave him a look that could slice stone. "You don't look like you belong here. You don't curse when people cheat you. You don't bark when the kids steal from you. You stand there polite, smiling like you don't know the rules." "That's suspicious." Darius swallowed, unsure of how to answer. "Maybe I'm just different." She shook her head, unimpressed, and walked off to set her tray. But he noticed she didn't look away for long. Her eyes kept sliding back toward him as though she was testing him, waiting to see what kind of man he really was. The hours crawled. Darius sold a few cups, but the heat was brutal. His shirt stuck to his back and his arms ached from scooping. Across from him, Keisha's stall stayed busy. People came and went, laughing, joking, arguing, always leaving with food in their hands. At one point, an older woman in a faded church dress begged Keisha for credit. Darius watched as Keisha sighed, rolled her eyes, and still handed over 2 pieces wrapped in foil. The woman walked away, murmuring blessings, while Keisha shook her head and muttered, "Kindness doesn't pay rent." But Darius saw the truth in her. Her face was tough, her words sharper than glass, but beneath it, there was a softness she tried to bury. He had known women like Monique, women who smiled for diamonds but sneered at weakness. Keisha was nothing like that. She gave when it hurt her, and that made her more powerful than anyone he had ever known. By late afternoon, a group of boys came rushing toward her stall, loud and hungry, jostling each other for the front. Darius saw the way Keisha's shoulders tensed, bracing herself. Before she could shout, he stood and walked over. He crouched low, handing out cornbread with steady hands, keeping the boys calm. He didn't ask for money. He didn't care. When the last boy left, Keisha's eyes narrowed. "You just gave away 5 of my best pieces for free." "They were hungry," he said simply. "That's not how business works." "Then I'll pay you." He pulled money from his pocket, more than she had asked, and pressed it into her hand. "Keep the change." She stared at the bills, then back at him. "Are you trying to buy me?" "No," he said softly. "I'm trying to thank you for not chasing me off yesterday." For a moment she said nothing. Then her lips twitched almost into a smile, though she quickly hid it. "You're strange," she muttered. That night, as the market thinned and shadows stretched long across the street, Darius sat on his stool, eating the last scoop of his own ice cream. Keisha sat nearby, wiping her hands with a cloth, her face caught in the glow of the fading sun. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he watched the way the light touched her skin, the way her eyes softened when she thought nobody was looking. Something shifted in him that night. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was need. A need to be near her, to understand her, to know why a woman who had so little could carry herself with so much strength. He had spent his life surrounded by power, but he had never seen power like hers. When he walked back to his motel, his body exhausted, his mind wouldn't rest. Every step echoed with her voice, her fire, her suspicion. He lay awake long after the city had gone quiet, wondering what it would take to prove to her that he wasn't just another stranger passing through. and in the silence he realized he wasn't chasing love in the way he once thought. He was chasing truth. For Darius Cole, truth had a name now: Keisha. Chapter 4. Cracks in the Mask. The days on Bailey Avenue began to blur together, but something inside Darius shifted each morning he returned to that corner. The cooler felt lighter in his hands even when it was full, and the long hours in the heat no longer dragged like chains. He found himself waiting for the moment Keisha would arrive. He watched the way she carried herself, the rhythm of her stride, the way her eyes swept over the street as if she could see every hidden story. To him, she was the pulse of the market, and without her, the place would have been just noise and dust. One afternoon, the heat clung to the air so thick it seemed to choke every breath. The crowd was restless, vendors louder than usual, children darting between stalls. Darius sat on his stool, wiping sweat from his face when he noticed Keisha looking at him from across the way. She wasn't selling at the moment. She was standing still, arms folded, eyes fixed directly on him. He felt her gaze cut through the disguise he had built. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. When she finally crossed the street, she stopped in front of him, close enough for him to see the faint scar on her chin and the weariness hidden in her eyes. "You're not from here," she said flatly. Darius hesitated. "I never said I was. You don't belong here. You talk soft. You smile too much. You act like the world never pushed you down. People who survive on this street, they don't carry themselves like you." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He wanted to protest, to explain, but instead he just shrugged. "Maybe I'm looking for peace." At that she laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was sharp, like broken glass. "Peace? Out here? You don't know this place. There's no peace here, only noise and struggle." Still, he held her gaze. Sometimes noise is better than silence. She studied him, suspicious, like she was reading a page in a book that didn't match the cover. Then she leaned a little closer and lowered her voice. "I saw you last night. Don't think I didn't. That black car, the tinted windows, the man who opened the door for you like you were some kind of boss. You think people don't notice, but I notice." Darius froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He had been careful, or so he thought, but her eyes were sharper than the rest. "Who are you, really?" she asked, her voice calm but heavy with accusation. He looked away toward the busy street, the laughter of children, the arguments over prices, the hiss of grease in a fryer. It all swirled around them, but for him, the world went quiet. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to rip off the disguise and show her the man he truly was. But fear closed his throat. What if she looked at him the way Monique had, with disgust? What if she decided he was nothing more than a rich man playing games with the poor? "I'm just someone trying to escape noise," he finally said. She stared at him a long moment before shaking her head. "Real doesn't hide in disguise." Then she turned and walked back to her corner, leaving him hollow and shaken. That night he couldn't sleep. The motel's ceiling fan rattled above him, the sound almost mocking. Her words replayed in his mind. Real doesn't hide in disguise. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. He had built an empire of glass towers, but a single woman with flour on her apron had seen straight through him. Jamal knocked softly at the door, slipping inside like a shadow. "Sir, if she suspects, we should move you." Another location, another street. "No," Darius said, his voice hoarse. "If she wants to expose me, let her. I won't run. You're risking everything. I already risked everything when I let myself believe money could buy love." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. If this ends, then maybe it was never real to begin with. The next morning, when he returned to Bailey Avenue, the market seemed louder, rougher, as if testing his resolve. Radios blared, men argued, the smell of smoke and hot oil thickened the air. Keisha was already there, her stall lined neatly with cornbread. She didn't greet him. She didn't look his way. But he felt her presence like the sun on his skin. He set up his cooler, determined to stay, determined not to run anymore. The hours dragged. He scooped ice cream for children, listened to the gossip that swirled in the air, and caught fragments of Keisha's voice as she bantered with her customers. At one point, he offered a smile and said quietly, "Your cornbread smells good today." She didn't answer. Later, when a woman begged her for credit, Darius watched as Keisha sighed but still gave the woman food. She muttered under her breath, "Kindness doesn't pay rent." But Darius saw the truth in her actions. When their eyes finally met across the street, he gave her a small, almost hesitant smile. This time she didn't turn away, but she didn't smile back either. Instead, she studied him with that same unsettling intensity, as if every lie he carried was laid bare in her sight. And in that moment, Darius knew the cracks in his disguise had begun to show. The question now was whether Keisha would shatter it completely, or whether he would find the courage to break it himself. Chapter 5: Shadows of the Past. The morning sun rose slow over Jackson, laying down a pale gold across Bailey Avenue. The market opened as it always did, with vendors shouting over one another, the smell of frying catfish spilling into the streets, the rhythm of gospel humming from an old radio propped against a crate. But for Darius, that day felt heavier. He had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling of his motel room, hearing Keisha's words again and again. Real doesn't hide in disguise. He carried that weight with him as he set his cooler down and tried to steady his hands. Keisha arrived not long after. Her tray was stacked high, her apron pulled tight. She looked sharp, focused, like she always did, but Darius noticed the way her eyes flicked to him every so often. Quick glances she tried to disguise as nothing. He wondered what she thought when she looked at him. Whether she saw a man or a mask, whether she believed anything he said at all. The morning moved with a steady rhythm. Children came by, tugging at Keisha's apron strings, asking for the roundest piece of cornbread, teasing her with their laughter. Darius watched how she handled them, tough words, quick scolds, yet always slipping one of them an extra piece when she thought no one was watching. He saw kindness hiding in her roughness, a softness she tried hard to bury. By noon, the heat wrapped around the street like a blanket, and both of them were dripping with sweat. Keisha waved her hand, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. When she turned back, her face was softer, and she asked almost against her will, "So tell me, Ice Cream Man, what book do you read that makes you talk like that?" Darius paused, caught off guard. "One's about people, about pain, about how not to let it break you." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing, but this time not with suspicion. "Deep," she said, though her tone was half mocking. He gave a small laugh. "I try." She didn't smile, but the corner of her lips threatened to betray her. For a long moment they both stood in silence, the crowd moving around them, the noise rising like a tide. And then, almost as if she had been holding it back for too long, Keisha began to talk. "When my daddy passed, I was 14, she said suddenly, her voice low and steady. "He worked the mills until the machines broke him down. My mama tried to hold us together, but 2 jobs weren't enough. We ate once a day, sometimes not at all. And when she got sick, I had to leave school. Couldn't keep going when the bills kept piling." Darius listened, his chest tightening with every word. He had never heard her speak about herself, not like this. "I learned to bake from Miss Ethel, the neighbor woman," Keisha went on, her hands busy kneading dough as she spoke. "She was rough. Said I rolled the dough like I was fighting it. But she taught me everything she knew. She died 2 years back. Stroke took her quick, left me her old oven beat up as it is. That's what I use now." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but she didn't let it linger. She turned her face away, focused hard on the dough. Darius stood there, moved in a way he hadn't been in years. He wanted to reach out to tell her he understood, but he knew silence sometimes carried more weight than words. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice low. She shrugged like it didn't matter. Life doesn't wait for sorry. Those words hit him harder than he expected. He thought about his own life, the way he had let money build walls so high he couldn't see past them. He thought about Monique's laugh, about the years he wasted believing love could be bought. And here was Keisha, standing in front of him with nothing but an apron and an old oven, stronger than anyone he had ever met. Later that afternoon, when the market began to thin out, a commotion broke out near the pepper sellers. 2 men shouted, pushing each other until one fell into a table of tomatoes. The crowd swarmed, drawn to the fight. Keisha sighed, muttering, "Always drama on Fridays," and tried to focus on her tray. But then a boy darted past, quick as a shadow, snatching one of her cornbreads as he ran. "Hey!" she shouted. Before she could move, Darius was already chasing. He ran through the heat, weaving between stalls, his sneakers pounding the broken pavement. He caught the boy near the gutter, grabbed his arm, and pulled him to a stop. The boy froze, wide-eyed, clutching the bread. "I'm sorry," he shouted. "I was just hungry." Darius looked at him, skinny, dusty, no shoes on his feet. He felt his anger melt away. Kneeling, he handed the bread back. "Next time, ask. Don't steal." The boy nodded quickly, tore into the food, and ran off. When Darius returned, breathing hard, Keisha stood with her arms folded. Her expression was unreadable. "You didn't beat him," she said quietly. "No." "You let him go?" "Yes." She stared at him a long time, the fire in her eyes softer than before. "You're strange," she said finally. "Ice cream man." He smiled faintly. "I just hate seeing people suffer." Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "So do I." That night, as the last stalls closed and the street emptied, Darius sat on the small bench behind his cooler. The stars began to pierce through the humid sky, and the air was finally cool. He leaned back, exhausted but alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. His thoughts circled back to Keisha, the strength in her hands, the weight in her stories, the way her voice cracked when she mentioned her mother, even though she tried to hide it. He whispered her name into the night. Keisha. For the first time in his life, he felt joy that had nothing to do with money, nothing to do with power. It came from dough and flour, from laughter and sharp words, from a woman who had nothing yet carried herself like she had everything. And as the market faded into silence, Darius knew this was no longer about an experiment. This was about finding the truth in her eyes, no matter how much it scared him. Chapter 6. The Disappearance. The first sign that something was wrong came with silence. Bailey Avenue woke up every morning with its usual rhythm. Vendors setting up before the sun fully broke, children running ahead of their mothers, old men dragging chairs outside barber shops. But on that morning, Keisha's corner was empty. No tray stacked with cornbread, no sharp voice cutting through the noise, no scarf-wrapped head moving quickly between customers. Darius stood at his cooler, waiting, watching the path where she always appeared, his chest tightening with every passing minute. At first, he told himself she was late. Maybe she overslept, maybe her oven broke, but the hours stretched and still she did not come. Customers asked where she was, shrugging when he said he didn't know. The market felt incomplete without her presence, like a song missing its beat. Darius scooped ice cream with a heavy heart, his smile weak, his hands slower than usual. By afternoon, he wasn't selling at all. He was scanning the street, searching for her face. When dusk came, painting the sky with tired shades of orange and purple, he packed up early. His body moved on its own, but his mind was far away. That night at the motel, the silence pressed harder than it ever had before. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the walls. He thought of her hands, rough yet steady, rolling dough with the rhythm of survival. He thought of her laugh, sharp but alive. He thought of the way she looked at him when she suspected something wasn't right. And now she was gone. The second day without her was worse. People asked again, some with worry, some with impatience. She's sick. Maybe she moved. Heard her landlord raising the rent. Nobody had answers. The third day, he didn't even open his cooler. He just stood by her corner, staring at the empty spot as the market swirled around him. Without Keisha, the noise of Bailey Avenue was unbearable. It was all chaos and no center. By the fourth day, exhaustion had settled deep in his bones. Jamal found him slumped on the stool, eyes red from nights without sleep. "Sir," Jamal said carefully, keeping his voice low so others wouldn't hear. "This is breaking you." Maybe she found out. Maybe she saw something and decided to leave before you could explain. Darius shook his head slowly, his voice raw. "She saw the car, I know she did, and now she thinks I'm just another liar, another man playing games." "Then tell her the truth," Jamal urged. "Better she knows now than later. Better she hears it from you." Darius's throat tightened. "What if the truth ends it all?" "Then maybe it was never real," Jamal said softly. Those words lingered long after Jamal left. Darius stayed there until the sun slid away and the street lamps flickered to life. His hands gripped the cooler handle, but he didn't move. He was afraid that if he left, he might miss her return, as if she could appear at any moment and erase the hollow ache gnawing at him. On the fifth day, a boy darted past, the same boy who had once stolen cornbread from Keisha. Darius called out, his voice rough. "Hey, you know Keisha, the cornbread seller?" The boy stopped, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, I know her." "Where is she?" Darius asked, stepping closer. "Do you know where she lives?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "I can show you." Darius pressed a crumpled bill into his hand, and together they wound through narrow streets he had never seen before. The city looked different here. Houses sagged against one another, paint peeling, windows cracked. Children played barefoot in the dust, their laughter carrying over the hum of broken air conditioners. The boy finally stopped in front of a small yellow house with chipped siding and a crooked porch. "She stay up there," the boy said, pointing to the second floor. Darius climbed the creaking steps, his heart pounding harder with every one. He raised his hand and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, softer this time, afraid of what waited behind the door. He was about to turn away when it opened. Keisha stood there. Her scarf was gone, her hair pulled back messily. Her eyes were swollen, red as though she had cried for hours. Her lips were dry, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She looked nothing like the fierce woman who ruled Bailey Avenue with her voice and her tray. She looked fragile, stripped bare, and the sight of her sent a rush of pain through Darius's chest. For a moment neither spoke. The air between them was heavy with words unsaid. Then she stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind her, as if to block him from seeing inside. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low, almost breaking. "I had to see you," Darius whispered. "Why?" she asked, her eyes narrowing though her voice trembled. "You lied." Her words hit harder than any blow. Darius opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He felt the weight of his disguise pressing down on him, the walls of his secret closing in. Standing there on that crooked porch, he realized the truth he had been running from was finally staring back at him in her broken eyes. And for the first time since he left his mansion, Darius Cole felt powerless. Chapter 7. The Truth and the Choice. The porch creaked beneath their feet as the evening pressed down on Jackson. The sky was dimming into a deep violet, the first stars peeking out timidly, but neither Darius nor Keisha noticed. They stood facing each other, both carrying silences that weighed heavier than words. Keisha's arms were folded, her shoulders drawn tight, her eyes red from tears that had already dried. Darius's chest rose and fell, each breath struggling against the wall he had built around his life. "I had to see you," he said again, his voice trembling now, the steadiness gone. Keisha shook her head, bitter but tired. "You lied. You walked onto Bailey Avenue like a man with nothing, but you're not one of us. You've been playing a game I didn't ask to join." Her words cut him deep, but this time he didn't flinch. He stepped closer, close enough to see the faint lines of exhaustion around her mouth, close enough to feel the tremor in her breath. "It wasn't a game. I came there because I was suffocating in my own life. I came there because I needed to know if anyone could see me for who I am, not what I own. And when I saw you, Keisha, I knew. I couldn't turn away." She let out a harsh laugh, though her voice cracked in the middle. "You expect me to believe that? Men like you don't wake up one day and decide to sell ice cream in the heat for fun. You were testing us, testing me. Do you know how insulting that feels? To be treated like some experiment?" He shook his head quickly, his eyes wet. "No. That's not what this is. I swear to you, I wasn't testing you. I was testing myself. I needed to know if I could strip away everything and still be a man worth standing beside." The words hung between them. For the first time, Keisha didn't respond right away. Her body softened just slightly, though her eyes remained guarded. Darius reached into his pocket and pulled out his watch, the gold glinting faintly under the porch light. He placed it on the railing between them. "This is who the world thinks I am. This is the weight I carry every day. But it's not me. Not anymore. I don't want to live behind it. Keisha looked at the watch, then back at him, her expression torn. Her voice was low. So what do you want from me? He swallowed hard. The truth. Whatever it is. If you never want to see me again, say it and I'll go. But if you believe even for a second that what we shared on that street was real, then let me prove it to you. The night around them deepened. Somewhere down the block a dog barked. Music floated faintly from a neighbor's radio. A gospel tune about mercy and forgiveness. Keisha's hand trembled where it gripped her apron. She turned away for a moment, staring out into the dark street as if searching for an answer in the shadows. You don't understand, she whispered finally. People like me, we don't have the luxury of trusting too easy. My whole life has been about watching people promise one thing and deliver another. I've been burned enough to know better. Darius stepped closer still, his voice breaking. Then let me be the one who doesn't burn you. Her breath caught, and for a second her defenses wavered. She remembered the way he chased down the boy who stole only to feed him. She remembered how he stood in the heat, sweating, fumbling with scoops, refusing to quit. She remembered the way his eyes softened whenever they landed on her. Never mocking, never taking, only offering. Something inside her cracked under the weight of those memories. She faced him again, her eyes wet but unyielding. If you want me to believe you, then you can't hide anymore. No more disguises, no more lies. If you want to be here, then be here as yourself, not as some pretend ice cream man. Darius nodded slowly, his throat tight. Then tomorrow you'll see me. All of me. The silence that followed was thick with promise and fear. Neither spoke again. Keisha finally opened her door and stepped inside, leaving him standing alone on the porch. The door closed softly, not like a slam. Not final, but not open either. Darius stood there in the quiet, the night air heavy around him. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew that it would demand his truth, and that truth might cost him the only woman who had ever seen beyond his walls. As he walked back through the narrow streets, past the broken houses and flickering porch lights, he felt stripped bare in a way money could never protect him from. Yet deep inside, beneath the fear, there was a fragile flame of hope. Because for all the lies he had lived, for all the masks he had worn, Darius Cole had finally spoken the only truth that mattered. He didn't want wealth, or power, or status. He wanted love that saw him without disguise, and whether Keisha chose to give it or not, the choice was finally out of his hands. The story was no longer about what he could buy, it was about what his heart could endure. And in that test, for the first time, he felt more alive than he ever had in the mansion he once called home.